You once believed that to defeat a narcissist you had to expose them, force them to admit their guilt, demand an apology, make them pay for the pain they caused. You thought justice would come through their confession, their regret, their acknowledgement of what they did to you. But then you realized no apology was coming, no remorse, no justice that would magically mend your broken heart. All that remained was you, silent, exhausted, carrying a shattered soul, a mind spinning with twisted memories, and one question playing on repeat: how can they act like nothing ever happened? The truth is, they know exactly what they did. They're not unaware. They just don't see it as wrong. They don't feel the need to take responsibility, and they never intended to. Because in their world, your emotions were never sacred. They were tools to manipulate, not something to respect or protect. So real victory doesn't come when they fall to their knees and admit they were wrong. It comes when you no longer need that to feel free, when you stop chasing explanations, when you stop reacting, when you stop waiting for someone who doesn't know how to love you to suddenly become capable of compassion. Victory arrives the moment you can see through the lies, the manipulation, the carefully crafted charm, and you no longer take the bait. When your silence is no longer submission, but your quiet declaration that says, "I'm no longer playing this game." And then, when you've truly moved on, not with revenge, not with anger, not with loud declarations, but with quiet clarity. They feel it. Even if they never admit it, they know they've lost you. Not just physically, but emotionally. They lost the control. They lost the access. They lost the power they thought they'd always have. The door they assumed you'd always leave open has closed. And not with rage, but with peace. You no longer orbit around them. And for the narcissist, that isn't just a goodbye. It's an ego collapse. This video will walk you through 10 clear and powerful signs that you've truly moved on from the narcissist, and why that terrifies them more than anything. This isn't a checklist to prove that you won. It's a reminder that you've returned to yourself, to your worth, to a freedom they can no longer touch. If you've ever felt stuck in the cycle of manipulation, of false hope, of promises never kept, this video is for you. Watch until the end, because you deserve to remember this. You're not crazy, you're not weak, and you are slowly, surely reclaiming your life. And if you're ready to continue your healing, not with illusions but with truth, tap subscribe, because what you're really seeking isn't their validation, it's your own peace. Sign 1. You no longer react to their usual tactics. They still try. Even after you walked away in silence, even after time has passed and there's no clear connection left between you, the narcissist will inevitably find a way to circle back. Not because they love you, not because they've changed or truly regret what they've done. They come back for one reason and one reason only: to see if they still have power. A vague message sent in the middle of the night, a cryptic post that drips with hidden meaning, a coincidental appearance at a place they know you used to go, an apology laced with nostalgia, or worse, photos of a new person, radiant, happy, perfect, showcased as if you never existed. All of it, nothing new. And once upon a time it might have worked. You might have felt your heart tighten, your mind spiral, your emotions hijacked. You would have reacted, but not this time. This time you see the script. You see the performance. You recognize the tactics behind the mask. You no longer mistake manipulation for love or curiosity for care. And instead of engaging, instead of exploding or crafting the perfect final message, you choose silence. Not out of fear or avoidance, but from a place of hard-won clarity. You've been through this loop too many times to not know the truth. Every response, whether soft or explosive, is an invitation to play the same old game. They don't need your love, they just need your emotional availability. As long as you react, they still exist in your world. But now, they don't. You don't need explanations anymore. You don't need closure. You don't need answers from someone who was never capable of honesty to begin with. You know that every conversation is just another setup, another chance for them to twist the narrative and make you question yourself all over again. And you, with everything you've learned and endured, now understand that game is over. You used to play it, used to bleed in it, used to scream for understanding, but not anymore. You no longer live on the edge of emotional reactivity. You no longer wait to decode their silence. You no longer let your peace depend on what they say or don't say. You've learned the hardest lesson. Your greatest power is in not giving them your energy at all. They don't know how to handle that. Narcissists don't know what to do with someone who no longer reacts. They expect rage, they expect heartbreak, they expect you to call, to email, to argue, to chase. They never prepare for you to disappear from the game entirely. And that's where your power begins. You're no longer trying to defend yourself. You're no longer trying to predict their next move. You no longer allow your emotions to be controlled by someone else's chaos. You've finally learned that choosing not to respond is not weakness. It's liberation. It's peace that doesn't require anyone's permission. And that peace, more than any revenge, terrifies them. So no matter what tactic they use now, whether it's sweet or cruel, subtle or aggressive, you are no longer moved by it. You don't hate them. You don't love them. You don't wait for them. You have pulled all your emotional energy back where it belongs, within you, and that makes them unravel. Because to a narcissist there is nothing more terrifying than a person they can no longer disturb. Nothing more destabilizing than someone who refuses to play their role in the script. You are no longer reactive, not because you don't feel, but because you've walked through fire and chosen not to carry the ashes. And in that silence, you win, not because you destroyed them, but because they can no longer destroy you. Design 2, you no longer need closure. There was a time when you believed that in order to move on, you needed an ending. A final conversation, a genuine apology, a clear acknowledgement that what you went through was real, that the pain was valid, that what happened was unfair. You waited for that moment like it was the final key to your freedom. You thought that if they would just sit down, listen, understand, then maybe you could finally let go, but they never came. There was no explanation, no confession, no apology, and each day they stayed silent, ignored you, or carried on as if nothing had happened, was another day you felt like you were the only one still carrying the truth, while the one who broke you walked away untouched. Then, one day, you realized the closure you were waiting for would never come, not because you didn't deserve it, but because they were never capable of giving it. They didn't see themselves as wrong. They didn't know how to be accountable, and they lacked the emotional depth to understand what they had done to you. That wasn't just a flaw, it was their nature. And suddenly it all became clear. If you kept waiting for them, you'd forever be trapped in a story that never had a real ending. A person who can fake love can just as easily pretend you never existed, and no words, no sit-down conversation, no apology would change that. You used to believe you needed them to acknowledge the pain to move on, but you don't. You don't need validation from someone who invalidated you. You don't need one last talk to understand why they treated you the way they did. You don't need them to name your hurt. Because now, you're strong enough to validate your truth yourself. You lived through the confusion, the manipulation, the nights of silent suffering. You carry the scars. You witnessed it all. And that is enough. You don't need the person who caused the wound to confirm what you already know. True healing begins when you realize closure doesn't come from them. It comes from your decision to stop waiting, to stop hoping they'll become who you needed, to stop drafting messages you'll never send, to stop rehearsing what you'd say if they happened to reach out, to stop living in a story you kept open out of hope it might end with justice. You no longer imagine them showing up to say, "I'm sorry you didn't deserve that." You no longer wait for that look in their eyes to soften, for their voice to finally mean what it says. Not because you didn't want it, but because you now understand. A heart that never felt guilty can never offer the closure you longed for. So you choose differently. You choose to close the door yourself, not with slamming, not with rage, but with the quiet strength of someone who knows that no ending written by them could ever set you free. The ending comes from within, from the moment you stop expecting them to be the one to help you release the pain, from the second you breathe deeply, place a hand over your heart and say, "I don't need it anymore." And in that moment, you become the author of your own conclusion. You no longer need closure. You no longer need the final conversation. You no longer need them to back down or break down. The peace you carry today didn't come from their words. It came from your courage, from the pain you walked through, from the freedom you unlocked on your own, after they left you with a door they never had the decency to close. Sign 3. They are no longer at the center of your thoughts. There was a time when they consumed your mind. Every word, every look, every subtle sign could keep you awake at night. You would wake in the middle of your sleep haunted by the same recurring dream, not because you wanted to remember, but because your mind hadn't yet learned how to let go. They would show up in your thoughts at the most unexpected moments, while making coffee, in the middle of work, even during your happiest hours, like a constant background noise you couldn't mute. You didn't say their name, but somehow your emotions still revolved around them. It wasn't love anymore, nor hatred. It was a lingering, mental grip, quiet and exhausting. And then one day you suddenly realized hours had gone by and you hadn't thought about them. You weren't checking their social media. You weren't subconsciously searching for traces of them in everything around you. You weren't staging accidental encounters or wondering where they were, what they were doing, or with whom. There was no longer a tightening in your chest when someone mentioned their name. They were no longer the first person you thought of when something was painful, beautiful, or worth sharing. They had quietly stepped out of the center of your universe. And you didn't even notice when. And you understood this wasn't denial. You weren't forcing yourself to forget. It was simply that you had begun to truly live. For yourself. Your mind was now occupied with other things, future plans, long-forgotten passions, meaningful connections that felt safe and real. You started remembering who you were, the version of yourself that had disappeared because you spent so long analyzing them, trying to explain what could never be explained. You returned to things that made you feel peaceful without requiring you to sacrifice your dignity, and in that quiet realization you knew, healing isn't loud. It doesn't need to declare itself. It happens slowly, steadily, when your mind stops placing them at the center. There were no more obsessive mental loops asking why, no more what-ifs, no more wondering, do they still think of me? The days when your emotional world was still orbiting around theirs had come to an end. Instead, you were present again. You began to enjoy the moment. A cup of tea, a song, a heartfelt conversation with someone who didn't manipulate you. And those little moments, so small, so ordinary, became the most powerful proof of all. They no longer held power over your mind. You don't hate them. You don't love them. You don't hope for their pain. You don't need them to realize anything. You simply reclaimed something you didn't even realize they took. Your mental space. The right to think freely. The right to not be emotionally hijacked by a message or a calculated silence. The right to exist outside of their influence. And when you realized they no longer showed up regularly in your thoughts, it wasn't because you forgot them, it was because you finally remembered yourself. Sign 4. You no longer feel guilty for walking away. In the beginning, when you walked away, it wasn't the pain that broke you. It was the guilt. A part of you kept asking, was I too harsh? Did I give up too soon? Did I not try hard enough? You remembered their vulnerable moments, their breakdowns, the times they seemed wounded, and you were the one who stayed, the one who forgave, the one who held their broken pieces as if it was your duty to fix what they refused to face. You once believed that love meant sacrifice, that to love meant to give endlessly, to stay until there was nothing left in you. So even when you left, for your own survival, you still felt like a traitor, as if you had betrayed something sacred. But over time, as you slowly freed yourself from the cycle of manipulation, you began to see clearly that guilt didn't come from your conscience, it came from their careful conditioning. They made you believe that every failure was your fault, that if you had been better, more patient, more loving in the right way, they wouldn't have hurt you. They twisted your departure into proof of your weakness, your lack of loyalty, your inability to handle love, when in truth, they never truly stood beside you at all. And then, one day, you awakened. You were never wrong for choosing yourself. You were never obligated to stay in a relationship that cost you your dignity, drained your spirit, and made you feel small, even when you were loving deeply. You realized that walking away wasn't betrayal, it was rescue. And there's nothing wrong with choosing to live, nothing wrong with leaving a place you poured your heart into but received only blame and invalidation in return. You began to understand. Forgiveness doesn't mean giving someone permission to keep hurting you. And kindness doesn't require you to abandon yourself completely. When the guilt faded, you felt lighter. You no longer apologized for protecting your boundaries. You no longer explained why you chose silence. You no longer needed to prove how much you loved. You didn't need external validation anymore because you finally saw yourself clearly, fully, and worthy. Sig 5, you start setting boundaries and holding them. In the past, you didn't know what boundaries were, or if you did, you didn't dare set them, not because you were foolish, but because you had been taught, whether subtly or overtly, that love meant acceptance, endurance, and sacrifice. And the narcissist used that perfectly. They made you believe that forgiveness was proof of your goodness, that silence was maturity, that the more you overlooked their behavior, the more loving you were. It didn't have to force you, because you were already dismantling your own boundaries piece by piece in order to hold on to a love that was quietly destroying you from the inside. You used to think saying no was selfish. You believed walking away when hurt was betrayal. You kept quiet to avoid arguments. You smiled even when your soul felt hollow. You ignored the alarms ringing in your intuition because you were afraid to lose them. You thought that if you were soft enough, loving enough, agreeable enough, they would change. But they didn't. The more you endured, the more they pushed. The more you gave, the more they controlled. And the more you abandoned yourself, the more they believed you had no worth. Until one day, you began to look back. Not in a dramatic breakdown, but through quiet exhaustion. In those moments when you wanted to scream but swallowed it down. In the nights you lay next to them and felt lonelier than ever. In the moments you laughed but your eyes no longer lit up. And you finally understood. No one can cross a boundary you didn't open yourself. And you began doing what you'd never done before. You said no. You didn't have to scream. You didn't need a fight. Sometimes it was silence at the right moment. Leaving without making a scene, disconnecting when you sensed manipulation, you began setting boundaries, not just in words, but in actions, in your presence, in your refusal to explain away your truth. And the most powerful part was this: for the first time, you didn't feel guilty about it. You weren't scared of upsetting people. You no longer blamed yourself for not pleasing everyone. You no longer shrank when someone said you've changed. Because you knew, if someone is angry about your boundaries, it means they benefited from your lack of them. At first, setting boundaries felt strange, a little lonely, a little uncomfortable, because you were so used to shaping yourself into someone easy to love, just to be kept around. But with time, you felt lighter. You no longer had to perform. No longer had to be the one who was always okay, always agreeable, always selfless. You allowed yourself to be tired, to take your time replying to a message, to say, "I don't agree," without over-explaining, and then something remarkable happened. The people who once manipulated you became frustrated. They called you selfish, cold, unrecognizable. They said, "You're not the same anymore." And they were right, you weren't. You were no longer easily controlled, no longer quick to forgive disrespect, no longer willing to equate love with self-erasure. You no longer allowed others to measure your kindness by how much pain you could tolerate. You finally realized love should never require you to sacrifice your self-respect. A healthy relationship doesn't ask you to shrink, and boundaries don't make you cold, they keep you whole. Setting boundaries and holding them is not just a protective act, it's a quiet declaration. I see myself, I value myself, and I will no longer abandon myself to be loved. You don't need anyone's permission to do that. You don't need applause or validation. You just need you, the version of yourself that was once blurred, now choosing to return and shine again. You lived in a permanent state of emotional preparation, like walking on eggshells around someone who could explode for any reason, and you called that love. You became skilled at tiptoeing around broken glass, teaching yourself to step lightly enough not to upset them. You were so used to the chaos that the absence of it felt empty. You confused peace with boredom because you had never really experienced it before. Scene 6. You begin to feel peace in the smallest moments. In the past, you became accustomed to living in a state of quiet tension, a constant low-level alert, as if everything might collapse at any second. You couldn't tell what real peace felt like because you had lived for so long inside emotional whiplash. One moment warmth, the next cold distance. One day lifted to the heavens, the next dropped without warning. In that relationship, nothing felt secure. Peace was temporary. Affection was something to be earned, never freely given. Even when you smiled, part of you doubted it. Even when they said they loved you, part of you braced for the next storm, until you left. Until you began to live in your own space. Alone. Quiet. With no one controlling your mood. No one manipulating your emotions. No more guessing games about whether today they'd be distant or affectionate. And in that silence, which at first may have felt uncomfortable, you began to rediscover something that had been gone from your life for far too long. Peace. At first, it arrived in the smallest moments. A morning where you woke up without heaviness. A meal enjoyed slowly without the weight of criticism or silence. A song playing in the background and you caught yourself smiling. Not for anyone else, not to prove anything, but simply because your heart felt light. You realized you were breathing, not with urgency or tension, but deeply, slowly, fully. And then you found yourself sitting alone with no one to please, no one to appease. And you didn't feel lonely. You felt whole. You began to cherish the simple things you once overlooked. A sunset, the rustle of leaves, a book you never finished. You no longer rushed to find someone to share every moment with. You started learning how to share those moments with yourself. You no longer needed validation to feel valuable. You no longer needed chaos to feel alive. And when you noticed you no longer panicked at a late-night text, no longer held your breath waiting for someone's reaction, no longer felt tension in your chest at the tone in someone's voice, you knew you had entered a new phase. A phase where your refuge wasn't another person, it was yourself. A phase where you no longer had to escape the world to find peace. Because you were carrying it within you. That is one of the clearest signs. You are healing and you are living. Stage 7. You're no longer afraid of new love. There was a time when the mere mention of falling in love again made your chest tighten. Not because you still loved the person from your past, but because the wounds they left behind hadn't yet begun to heal. You weren't afraid of being alone. You were afraid of repeating the past. Afraid of encountering a familiar gaze, gentle in the beginning, controlling in the end. Afraid of promises, of sweetness, of text messages saying, "I'm not like them," because you once believed those words, and the price you paid was your peace. After surviving a relationship with a narcissist, your mind begins to change. Love no longer feels like a universally beautiful thing that anyone can give freely. You learn to question things that come too quickly, too intensely, too perfectly. You begin to ask yourself, do they love me, or do they love the feeling of controlling me? And that fear seeps into everything. You close yourself off. You withdraw before someone can get to. You reject even the good ones, because you're not sure if their kindness is real or just another mask like the last. But then, somewhere along your healing journey, you notice something. Fear no longer has the final say. Your chest doesn't tighten when someone treats you kindly. You no longer see love as a threat. You begin to distinguish between genuine emotion and manipulation. You realize that love doesn't have to come with anxiety or control. You start sensing energy, not just through words, but through presence. Through how a person makes you feel safe, simply by letting you be yourself. No performance, no perfection, no proving required. You begin to open your heart again, not to fill a void, but to share the life you're now building on your own terms. You're no longer searching for a missing half, because you no longer see yourself as broken or incomplete. You begin to love from a place that no longer aches for rescue, but from a soul that has learned how to hold itself with care. You understand now, someone new doesn't come to save you. They come to walk beside you, and if they don't fit, you know how to let go without breaking. New love no longer feels like a nightmare, it feels like a possibility. A door you no longer keep locked, a space you're willing to open, but only to those who respect the peace you fought so hard to reclaim. You're not afraid to love, but you're also no longer in a rush. You don't seek love to fix you, because you've learned to feel whole within yourself. And that, right there, is one of the clearest signs that you've truly left your old relationship behind, when you no longer shut down your heart out of fear, but choose to open it, carefully, consciously, and without needing fear to guide you. Scene 8. You begin to feel gratitude for the journey. There was a time you wished it had never happened. A time when you were angry with yourself for staying too long, for believing too much, for hoping in something that was never real. You looked back at the years you lost, the sleepless nights filled with nightmares, the tears no one saw, and you asked yourself, how did I let myself endure all of that? There was a time you looked at that person with burning resentment, not just because they hurt you, but because they made you lose yourself. They turned you into a smaller version of who you were, doubtful, guarded, wounded, insecure. You once wished you could erase every memory, wipe it clean, leave no trace behind. But then, one day, when the pain stopped grinding you down, when your mind no longer spun in circles around the question why, you began to look back with different eyes. No more hatred, no more expectation that the universe would balance the scales. What you began to feel was something else entirely. Gratitude. Not gratitude for them, gratitude for yourself, for the one who made it through, the one who loved deeply, even when that love was taken advantage of, the one who endured but never lost the ability to believe in kindness, the one who wasn't understood, but still chose not to become someone who hurts others, the one who hit rock bottom but climbed up anyway, instead of staying there. You're grateful because now you see more clearly, not just them but yourself. You see your limits with more honesty. You've learned to listen to your intuition, the very part of you that used to be drowned out by manipulation. You've learned to trust silence, to trust space, to trust the boundaries you once feared to draw. You're grateful for the pain because it forced you to wake up, to look inward, to rebuild everything from within. You no longer see yourself as a victim. You no longer need anyone to confirm you were right or wrong. You're not living to prove that you've healed. You're just living, with the calm and clarity that only a journey like this can teach, at a cost only your soul knows. And that is an undeniable sign when you no longer wish to erase the past, but but instead walk through it with reverence, not because the past was beautiful, but because you became something greater through what was most painful. Sig 9. They no longer have the power to hurt you. There was a time when a single cold remark from them could keep you up all night, when a strange silence from their end would send you spiraling into panic. A dismissive look, a subtle jab, a careless action, it was all it took to break you. You lived as if your heart was hanging in their hands, and if they ever decided to drop it, you'd shatter. They knew exactly how to touch your deepest wounds, how to use words like knives, how to disappear just long enough to make you feel small, disposable, and unworthy. And you used to think, maybe I'm too sensitive, maybe I'm not enough, maybe I deserve this. You doubted yourself. You apologized for things that weren't your fault. You tried to calm storms you didn't create. You lived to avoid being hurt, but ironically, that fear of pain is what kept you in their grip, until one day, something inside you shifted. It didn't come after a fiery argument. It came in a quiet moment when they used the same old tactic, and this time, you didn't feel anything. No anger, no sadness, no urge to react. You didn't feel attacked, because their words no longer had the power to pierce through the armor you had spent so long building within yourself. You no longer felt the need to prove anything. No need to be understood, no urge to explain, no craving to make them see they were wrong. You just needed to walk away. And you did. In that moment you realized the power to hurt you no longer belongs to them, not because they became kinder, but because you stopped giving them that privilege. Your heart still feels, but it no longer lets just anyone walk in and out at will. You know your limits. You know who's worth opening up to. You know the difference between real affection and manipulation wrapped in tenderness. Now, they may say what they want, do what they will. You remain steady. Not because you're numb, but because you healed. You don't need to pretend you're strong. You are strong. From the inside out. Strength isn't the absence of feeling, it's the ability to feel and still not let someone else define you through your pain. That's a powerful turning point, when you're no longer afraid of being hurt, because you know you're strong enough to heal, when your emotional well-being no longer belongs to anyone else but rests exactly where it always should have been, with you. Sign 10. You no longer need them to feel worthy. In the past, you used to see their eyes as a mirror reflecting your worth. When they praised you, you felt lovable. When they went silent, you felt invisible. When they stayed close, you felt enough. When they pulled away, you questioned what you had done wrong. Your emotional state was tied to the volatility of their moods, and you mistook that for love. You learned to define yourself through how they looked at you, spoke to you, treated you. And the cruelest part was, they knew that, and they used it. You lived in constant hunger for validation. A compliment, a gentle touch, a small gesture of attention was enough for you to abandon your inner peace. You accepted half-hearted connections, empty promises, and endless uncertainty, just to avoid feeling worthless. They planted the false belief in you that you only mattered if they loved you. But then, one day something inside you woke up, not because they changed, but because you were tired. Tired of constantly proving your worth. Tired of trying to mold yourself into someone they'd approve of. Tired of living like someone begging for scraps of affection, when all you truly needed was to live in truth with yourself. You started to look inward, and you saw it clearly. No one has the right to define your worth except you. You don't need someone to call you enough in order to be enough. You don't need love to feel whole. You only need to be honest with your feelings and your truth. You no longer seek reflections of yourself in other people's eyes because you've learned to see from within. And for the first time, you realize this one truth. You've always been enough. Back then, during the pain, during the healing, and now they may ignore you. They may love someone else. They may pretend you never mattered, but you don't need their recognition anymore. You don't need to be remembered in order to know you had value. because you are no longer living to be validated, you are living to be free. Free from distorted definitions, free from the fear of not being chosen, free from the subtle trap of always feeling like you're not enough. When you no longer need them, not just physically, but in the deep identity-forming parts of your soul, that's when you've truly healed. That's when you return to yourself, not trying to impress, not rushing, not performing. Just present, just yourself, and already enough. You walked through hell, not with your feet, but with your heart. You lived through days when love was twisted into control, when peace was the price you paid just to hold on to someone who never truly intended to stay. But the miracle is this: you didn't stay there. You didn't let the wound define you. You rose without anyone reaching out, without anyone apologizing, without needing anyone to validate your pain. Each of the signs you've just explored, from your calm silence to your unshakable boundaries, to no longer needing them to feel worthy, is more than just a sign of healing. It's evidence of your rebirth. You're no longer the person who was manipulated. You're no longer the victim. You're no longer someone spinning in the question, why did they do this? You've risen, not through hatred, but through freedom, not through shouting, but through the quiet light now glowing from within. And here's what matters most. They feel it, even if they don't say it, even if they pretend not to care. The narcissist knows when they've lost control. They know when you're no longer afraid. They know when your eyes stop searching for their approval. And in that moment, you've already won. Not because you defeated them, but because you've outgrown the broken version of yourself they once controlled. Let this truth sink in. Revenge isn't making them suffer. The greatest revenge is no longer needing them to be happy. If you're already walking this path, even slowly, even with days that still feel unclear, you're headed in the right direction, and you are not alone, because no one deserves freedom more than you. If this video resonated with your journey, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's next. And remember this: you didn't just survive, you're living whole, clear, and untouchable.